Today, Republicans offering to give Democrats more time to address the debt ceiling. Mitch McConnell says he's open to raising it to cover government expenses for the next 2 months. The federal student loan forgiveness program is getting a major overhaul. The Department of Education says the changes could help thousands of people working in government and non-profit sectors. And Sweden and Denmark halt the Moderna vaccine for younger people. Why? That and much more coming up on NTD Business. Good evening. Great to have you with us. I'm Paul Graney. A quick update on the debt ceiling saga. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says Republicans will help raise the limit by just enough to cover spending through December. But he says if Democrats want to raise it more than that, they'll have to do it alone. The debt ceiling is a political football. It seems both parties are worried voters won't look favorably on whoever raises the limit. More debt means higher interest payments and less money for things that actually benefit society. McConnell says if Democrats want to move forward with their, quote, reckless taxing and spending spree, they could raise the limit alone. That's even though McConnell himself voted yes on a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill just in August. The Treasury Secretary is warning if the limit isn't raised by the middle of October, the U.S. could default on some of its obligations. Looks like McConnell will meet with the House Majority Leader Chuck Schumer later today to discuss his proposal. And Sweden is halting the use of Moderna's vaccine for people 30 and younger. It's after reports of side effects. The country's health agency says there's an increase of heart inflammation, although it says the risk is small. It recommends the Pfizer vaccine for younger people instead. Denmark also stopped the Moderna vaccine for people under 18 for similar reasons. The former White House COVID-19 advisor, Scott Atlas, told American thought leaders there shouldn't be a mandate for children to get the vaccine since they're not at high risk of infection. He says it's unethical to have them take it with the unknown long-term side effects. And over 400,000 COVID-19 home test kits are being recalled. They say they're not accurate. Ellume says some of the kits showed positive even if the person wasn't infected. It says about 10% of the tests gave a positive result, but didn't say how many were false positives. The tests were shipped and sold at major retailers, including Walmart, CVS, Target, and Amazon. Even the Department of Defense used them. Company says it has now isolated the cause and the affected customers will be notified. The tests were approved by the FDA. You ever tried to cancel a flight only to realize you can't get a refund? But you were sure that the airline was good for it last time you checked anyway. Well, maybe it was good for it before you bought the ticket, but not anymore. Carriers are coming under fire for constantly changing their fine print, even several times a year. NTD's Ellume Lee has more.
American Airlines changed its ticket rules twice last month to clear up confusion for passengers looking to get reimbursed. And it's not an isolated case. Actually, airlines change the rules on their tickets all the time. Some are simple changes like inflation adjustments or limits on the payments for bumping passengers. During the pandemic, airlines changed their refund policies, but some revisions reportedly erode customers' rights. Frontier updated its policy recently. For example, if a plane had to return to the gate because of a flyer's medical condition, the passenger will have to pay the airline for the cost. The Transportation Department is tasked with overseeing airlines' unfair practices, and DOT rules do say that airlines can't retroactively change rules after you bought a ticket. But consumer groups don't think that's enough. Paul Hudson, the president of FlyerRights.org, says anything goes and that airlines constantly revise the rules in their own favor. As for American Airlines, it says it was trying to, quote, more accurately reflect its practices with its update.
Thanks, Evelyn. And hold on to your cereal. All Kellogg's plant workers went on strike Tuesday, threatening your supply of Frosted Flakes. A local union leader says they've been in pay and benefit talks for over a year, but no progress. If workers don't accept the company's proposal, one union president says Kellogg's has threatened to send the jobs to Mexico. Kellogg's, though, says it offers great compensation and benefits and says it'll even increase them. After 18 hours on strike, a local union head said members will strike as long as necessary. And on the back of a massive oil spill in California, there are calls to accelerate the move away from traditional energy toward renewables. But with energy crises in Europe and Asia, what's the risk of moving too fast? NTD's Olin Richards has more.
The pipeline has essentially been pulled like a bowstring, and so at its widest point is 105 feet away from where it was.
After the massive oil spill over the weekend, there have been calls to move toward renewable energy. California's congressional delegation has introduced legislation to ban new oil and gas drilling in U.S. waters on California's coast.
This is about the stale air of normalcy versus the fresh air of progress. Right now, fossil fuel jobs literally are outnumbered 5-1 versus clean energy jobs in the state of California. Outnumbered 5-1 today. This does not have to be part of our future.
NTD spoke with two energy experts to get their opinions. Sterling Burnett is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute. He says renewable energy still pollutes. It's just a different type of pollution.
The pollution from renewables is created during the manufacturing of the renewables. They take a lot of rare earth minerals that have to be mined and refined.
Burnett also says renewables are unreliable, pointing to California's rolling blackouts every summer.
This is not a matter of is one better than the other. This is a matter of trade-offs. If we're going to go green, the trade-offs are less reliable energy at a way more expensive price point with reliability on foreign countries for that energy.
Daniel Turner is the founder of Power the Future, an organization that shares facts on energy. He is also concerned that renewables are unreliable.
Right now, we have major European leaders whose solution is, let us hope we don't have a cold winter. Right? How is that possible?
Both experts agree that pollution is still an issue with renewables and that nuclear is a good, clean, powerful source of energy. Meanwhile, the California oil cleanup continues. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
In the last 2 days, Dutch and British natural gas prices jumped 60%. Soaring prices are fueling the current energy crisis in Europe. NTD's Patrick Hayden spoke with one energy expert.
Over the last 48 hours, Dutch and UK gas prices have jumped 60%, and both countries saw a 40% increase within a day. The European Union's energy chief Kadri Simpson said energy regulations could be revised by the end of the year. That's to prevent soaring energy prices from derailing economies. One US-based energy specialist says the European market is too restricted.
Give Europeans more energy choice, that will wean them off their dependence and in an economically efficient and environmentally responsible manner.
Loris says environmental innovation needs to be nurtured from the bottom up.
I think we can have economic and environmental progress, but it doesn't come through these government-forced policies. It comes from making sure that we have a smooth energy transition in which energy affordability and reliability maintains to be a priority while we also make environmental progress.
He says the US is benefiting from other countries' restrictive energy policies as businesses relocate.
I think one thing that we've learned in the United States is that private property rights have been essential in developing the natural gas resources in the United States, where the majority of shale resources fall underneath private property, where the private property owners have the mineral rights and thus the incentive to develop those resources.
Loris says companies are moving to the US and citing the reason as low energy costs, which is due to what he says is a shale gas revolution. Stockpiles of natural gas in the EU are at their lowest levels in more than a decade. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And the Biden administration is expanding the number of people eligible for student loan forgiveness. Thousands will soon see a reprieve on their educational debts. NTD's Phil Zoe reports.
The Department of Education says it plans to help 500,000 students with their loans by updating a student loan forgiveness program that targets public workers like teachers, nurses, and firefighters.
Definitely, just do it. Relieve us all. We all need education.
It estimates over 20,000 students will have federal loans forgiven right away, totaling almost $2 billion.
I would definitely be for more funding for the public sector. Quite a few of my professors are still paying off their student loans.
The Education Department said frontline workers deserve it because they've been working at the front lines of the pandemic. But economics professor Richard Vedder disagrees.
And it's favoring some student borrowers over others, which is unfair and I think inappropriate.
Vedder says the relief comes at a bad time when the country is already in massive debt itself. Giving away more money may make things worse. We spoke to college senior Alejandra, who owes $10,000 in debt. She supports the student relief, but agrees that the tuition and debt is getting too high.
So it's just kind of in our, sadly in our DNA to being in debt is kind of the way to get ahead, but that's just unfortunate.
Economics professor Casey Mulligan says precisely because of government aid, that tuition keeps going higher.
Subsidized education, that makes more students willing to try to go to school, and that allows the schools, the colleges and universities specifically, to charge more.
Mulligan says when governments take over industries, the outcome is usually disastrous.
Student loans need to go back into the private sector where it's done with good service, done more cheaply, more efficiently.
Earlier this year, the government already canceled around $6 billion in loans for students who have permanent disabilities. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
And Wall Street ended higher today. The Dow rising 102 points, or 0.3%. S&P 500 gained 18 points, or 0.4%. The Nasdaq climbed 68 points, about 0.5% today. And the International Monetary Fund predicts global inflation will peak at 3.6% this fall and drop to about 2% by the middle of next year. Very optimistic, according to some top economists. IMF says their outlook may change, though, given the current supply chain challenges. It says inflation expectations, though, have remained relatively stable, as despite almost every commodity rising sharply since last year, food prices alone are up 40% globally, according to the UN. But despite inflation warnings from top economists, the IMF itself has told countries to spend as much as possible to stimulate the economy. Most central banks have done that and are still creating new money for governments to spend. So joining us to discuss inflation and the supply chain disruptions is Robert Murphy, Senior Fellow with the Mises Institute. Bob, pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to get your thoughts from your writings and your lectures. Inflation and the supply chain problems are no surprise to you that we're seeing them. I wanted to focus in on one thing you've been talking about is pricing signals in the economy, basically for anybody at home, how important it is for consumers or producers, even governments, to know the price that people are actually willing to pay, the market price of a good, and how important that is to a well-oiled and fully functioning economy. Maybe you can give us some insight on how these pricing signals have been disrupted, particularly over the past 18 months.
Well, sure. So I think before we explain how things are screwed up right now or have been in the last 18 months, let's just set the backdrop. So in a regular market economy, it's sort of astounding that normally when things are working smoothly, you go to the grocery store, the shelves are all stocked and you just expect them to be there. And if you went and investigated the history of how is it that loaf of bread happens to be there right when you want it, there would be thousands of people ultimately that were involved in producing, the wheat and the flour and so forth, and to get it there right on time, the person who had to drive the truck to the grocery store and back it up. And you just take it for granted that there's going to be an employee sitting at the counter waiting to ring you out and so forth, and the electricity is going to be there so you have the lights on in the store, right? So all these things just come together almost automatically, as it were. And so economists have realized that it's prices in a market economy that help coordinate all that activity. And so in particular, if something is relatively scarce, the price shoots up. So for example, if a copper mine collapses in a foreign country, and so temporarily the supply of copper is lower, then all of a sudden the price goes up. And so that's a signal to people around the world to economize. They use less of it, and that's exactly what you would want to have happen. They don't even need to know what the reason is. They just need to know the price went up, and that's how they know to use less of it. So that's how things work normally. And then particularly since the pandemic hit, you've seen governments and central banks at various levels do all sorts of interventions. So, of course, the first thing is the central banks just flooding the markets with what they call liquidity, which is just creating money electronically out of thin air and bestowing it on politically favored recipients. And so that sort of distorts the pricing mechanism, because now certain actors in the marketplace have more purchasing power than they should have. And so they can outbid other people for those resources, and that pushes up commodity prices and so forth.
And so putting aside what may come next, there's talks of new infrastructure packages, there's talks of quantitative easing continuing, et cetera. Let's put that aside for now. Just looking backwards over the past 18 months, the scale of the interventions, how long would it take for this to iron itself out again?
Well, sure. So, I mean, just to give people an idea, the U.S., for example, the overall public debt as a share of the economy went from in the 60 percentile up to, I think it's 126% if you're just using the full figure, not you're including like the Social Security Trust Fund and all that, in just like 13 years, something like that. I think going back to 2008, right? So it's a huge thing. Within the next 10 years or so, it's going to surpass its all-time peak that was set, after World War II there. So that's just giving some indication of not just that, oh, wow, they've been running deficits for the last few years, but just the size of these deficits, even as a share of the economy, is just unprecedented, again, except going back to World War II. And then on top of that, the problem is you might say, oh, well, there was this global pandemic, one-off emergency. Of course, they're going to run a lot of red ink, but now that we're back to normal. But no, that's not baked into the cake, as you say, with the infrastructure spending bill. Now, the Democrats, seeing how much under the Trump administration they borrowed and spent, say, hey, why wouldn't we do the same thing? If it's okay to spend this money during a pandemic, why wouldn't we do it to restore infrastructure?
Wow, incredible. Robert Murphy, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And new research says business insolvencies are set to rise in 2022 as governments withdraw support measures that kept many businesses afloat during lockdowns. Support measures include tax cuts and deferrals, forgivable or non-forgivable loans, think PPP in America, or simply cash transfers. As these become less common, the report predicts we'll see 15% more insolvencies globally next year. So what to do? Free market economists tend to be against government intervention in the private sector, but government-imposed lockdowns have complicated the situation. At this stage of the recovery, and as lockdowns are all but lifted, some economists like Federal Reserve nominee Judy Shelton are recommending reducing stimulus to allow the economy to normalize. And as Robert Murphy just alluded to, government intervention can distort economic signals. But this new report says additional massive government support will keep insolvencies low in the U.S. in 2021 and 2022. And the New Orleans Investment Conference is coming up at the end of the month. There'll be an incredible array of investors there. We're delighted to have two of the event's top real estate experts. In fact, they're the real estate guys, Robert Helms and Russ Gray. Guys, pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure you're really excited for the event, as we are here. What do you think some of the hot topics are going to be on the real estate side?
Well, it's always great to be at this conference. I think this will be our 8th or 9th year, and really it's a resource conference, but real estate fits into a portfolio pretty well. And of course, the big question is what's happening in housing and prices and mortgages and all that. So we're really looking forward to getting some of the big brains at the conference to batter around some of these ideas.
Absolutely. I think technology has really been a big point across the economy during lockdowns and work from home and this type of thing. We see on the real estate side, we had the growth of these crowdfunding apps. We also have even blockchain technologies is coming into the fray a little bit. Can you guys speak to that, what you're seeing in that space?
You know, we're really watching this carefully because blockchain, I think, is bigger than Bitcoin, obviously. And we are starting to see real estate transactions happen with cryptocurrency. But for the most part, the sellers are converting that right back into dollars. I think they're missing the point. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see lots of blockchain uses for real estate, not just transactional, things like title and contracts. And there's already smart contracts. And there's so many things that technology allows. And the very distributed basis of it means that it's not single point failure. Now, that is a threat to folks like title companies and some insurance companies. But I think if they'll get on board with it, we're going to see what's going to be a much less friction environment, meaning the costs will be able to come down for some of these things, and the validity of contracts and title records and those things should increase.
So how can investors take advantage of this trend? Where's the opportunity?
In the technology side or just in the space in general?
I think, well, I suppose, yeah, if you could lead with the technology side would be great, and maybe if there's anything to add.
Well, I think on the technology side, it's just a matter of being aware and open-minded. And I speak from experience because we were presented with Bitcoin in 2011, and I couldn't get my mind around it, didn't do it. Turned out to be an epic mistake. And I think that investors in general need to understand the impact of technology in all sectors and portfolios, and it's not something that can be ignored. So number one, just pay attention, be informed, be open-minded, and be willing to experiment a little bit with a piece of your portfolio and see what happens. I think beyond that, to Robert's point, it's going to impact the way the business is actually done. And one of the fundamental differences between the paper asset markets like stocks and bonds and even commodities, these are traded on international exchanges where everybody has access. Price discovery is very easy to happen. And so real estate does not work that way. It's very inefficient. And as technology makes real estate more efficient and makes broader markets, it actually will open up the asset class to investors who wouldn't normally be able to do it. And the people on the street who are finding the deals are going to have markets to bring those deals that are going to be a lot broader than just a multiple listing service in a local region.
It's a whole new world. The real estate guys, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come this evening. Might be a good time to book a flight to Hawaii. Southwest is offering 40% off, but you gotta act fast. And a young Russian man keeps up an ancient tradition. That and more coming up on NTD Business.
Secure, the true solution for your digital privacy and security. Secure is a private and secure messaging and email solution hosted in Switzerland, using military-grade encryption and Swiss privacy laws, giving you true privacy. Secure is 100% private and does not collect or sell any of your personal data. Secure's Helix technology connects you securely to our Swiss servers without the need of a VPN, guaranteeing privacy and security for all your communications. Secure Messenger doesn't require your phone number or any personal data that hackers target. Chat by Invites allows you to chat privately and securely with anyone outside of your secure network without the need for others to download Secure. Secure Send offers you a private and secure way to email anyone outside of Secure. You won't find this level of privacy or security on any other email or instant messaging application. Visit secure.com. Regain and protect your privacy today.
Shall we begin?
People are starving, sir. They're unable to buy a simple loaf of bread. Can you make any exception to the mark 666?
None.
If you don't get the mark, you don't eat. It's that simple. My goal has never changed. People will bow down to me or they will die.
Welcome back. Southwest Airlines wants you to kick off 2022 with some aloha. It's offering 40% off fares to America's most tropical state. It's good for travel between January 6th and March 9th, but you got to book by Thursday. Use promo code Hawaii 2022 on the company's website to activate the deal. Hawaii currently requires any unvaccinated travelers to test negative before boarding a flight to one of its islands. And in Russia, one young man is dedicating his life to the ancient tradition of hunting for wild honey. The secret hives have been passed down for generations in his family. NTD Senator Thomas has the story.
This young Russian man bears ropes and a blackened bee smoker. Ildar Yagafarov has a deep appreciation for the ancient practice of hunting for wild bee honey, a passion he inherited from his grandfather.
This is an ancient trade. The wild beehives are in trees. Some of the hives are left over from our ancestors, and they are 150 to 200 years old. These trees are still alive, still growing and giving us joy with their bees and their honey.
Yagafarov says he harvested his first wild bee honey when he was 13, and now he hunts for it every autumn. The 1,000-year-old tradition almost died out, but it's slowly making a comeback.
Wild bee honey is harvested the ancient way. Hunters climb up trees using ropes. We are the only ones to preserve it in our Bersiansky district.
The locations of the wild hives are kept secret, passed from generation to generation.
I know that my grandfathers used to farm wild bee honey. My father inherited the trees, the tools, but he didn't do it because it was Soviet times, times of collective farming. He said, I have a tractor, I have a job. Why would I go to the forest? I don't need it.
As the hunters abandoned collecting honey from the forests, many hives were lost, as well as the techniques to harvest them. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's the latest business updates for today, but you can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, it's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.